So this next article is actually really cool, talking about design patterns in JavaScript. This briefly touches on paradigms. I don't think it calls it paradigms, but this 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 scratches the surface of paradigms, which are ways to manage these design patterns. And in my opinion, are it's the next higher level. So um, this is like slices of a cake. You have your primitives, which are like booleans and strings and stuff. You have your objects, which you can instantiate using classes, um, or initialize and stuff using classes, and um, you can organize your code using that object-oriented approach. And then around that, you have like object-oriented code, and then you have, you have like this. Sorry, you have this aspect where it goes into different ways to structure that object-oriented code. Um, and what is good, what is bad, and stuff like that. And then above that, you have more. Uh, you approach paradigms, which are basically how to manage your entire code base and what is your like what are your rule sets on how you solve specific problems, right? And some paradigms are great for some things, some paradigms are great for others. There's no one right answer. And for people who say, oh, you should never do object oriented programming sucks, they're wrong. Same thing with functional programming, they're wrong. Procedural, they're wrong. All of that stuff. Um, there is always a case for you to do one thing um, over another, and there's no one right answer. Okay, so basically, you want your code to not repeat itself. If you find that you are repeating yourself, you likely need a function to do it. Okay, and that's why functional programming is absolutely fantastic. It solves that problem, and the next problem, and the next problem, and the next problem, and this one. Okay, so if you have small, really easy maintainable functions, then you're not going to repeat yourself because you're just going to call this function. Okay, you're not going to repeat the internal code, right? Um, Similar to the try catch statement, right? You don't. I personally don't like writing the try catch statement. I'll put it inside of an attempt, which will return a result, and that is partly object oriented and also partly functional, and it works really well. It's also modular, like creating functions that are really really specific to solving one problem um is not a great thing. um that is, I'm not saying that 100% right. If you are making a function that can only be used in one specific instance out of your entire code base, it's probably bad. You probably shouldn't have that in a function because you're not going to use it anywhere else. If it's only used once, then there's no reason to have it inside of an external function. You should have that in the scope. Don't be afraid to have long functions. That is procedural code, by the way. That is another paradigm. And you can have paradigms within paradigms. You don't have to stick to one. Okay. Um, and that gets into declarative versus imperative code. Um, Functional programming is, oh gosh, I always forget which one's which. Versus imperative. Yeah. So, imperative functions, images. Declarative code, would be like, that's not a great example because you should be doing this anyway. I mean, no, actually, no, you should not be doing that. You should be doing this. Um, so declarative code basically wraps imperative code, um, which imperative code is procedural, which can also be functional and can also be object oriented inside of it, but it is procedural. The idea of imperative is you run through a bunch of tasks, okay? And then you wrap that in a function name um, that you then can use. Say you pass in a specific string and you want it to do something and return some sort of value. That is it is a declarative function name of imperative code, and it's functional programming, even if there's some object orientedness inside of it. Okay. If you make it so you don't repeat yourself, which will make it so it's modular and reusable, it will be significantly easier to maintain, because if something goes wrong, it's likely one small subset of one function, and you just have to go in, identify the problem, determine the solution, fix it, and then you're done. You go back to the main course. Okay. And then I can say, oh, there's a problem with my result class. They know exactly what that is, because it's actually not a class, it's a result type, which is either the class OK or error. And like, it's easy to discuss that. But if I say, oh, there's a problem with my error handling code where I do try catch and I have this, like, I go really in depth, it's harder to understand. So if you wrap your functions, if you like solve these problems, or sorry, if you adhere to these why can't I think of the word, recommendations, it will be a lot easier for you to work and create more complex things that are still maintainable. Okay. So now, anti-patterns. Basically, these go completely against all of this. So the idea, this is something that I've been alluding to kind of this whole time. When you have like functions that are mutating state of something that's outside of that function scope, that is namespace completion. You are using the global scope improperly, in my opinion. Okay. And you maybe have seen me create a main function and then call that main function instead of just writing code in the global scope. That's because of this. I don't want to have it. It's just safer for me to be scoped than open. Okay, and just be in the global scope. It is just safer and easier for me to wrap my brain around what is going on, because then I'm not going to have weird outside influences. Okay. So yeah, if you don't adhere to these rules, you're going to have complexity, a lot of complexity. It can be difficult for you to understand what's going on because you don't have declarative function names. You have a bunch of procedural stuff that only happens once ever, and or sorry, you have a bunch of functions that only happen once ever, and it doesn't really make sense to do that. So that will make it difficult to understand and update, and you can it can be very difficult to test and debug code. Okay. In addition, it can be unstable. Okay. One of my biggest things is making sure that no matter what, my program cannot enter a state where it is not salvageable. Okay. Or if it does, it needs to throw an error and completely crash. But once the server starts going and it opens up, I never want it to crash. And so I need to make sure that absolutely every single request is handled in such a way that even if there is an error inside of the request, it will not crash the program. Okay? And that is one of the biggest decisions that, like, I think some of Node.js packages like Express failed. They did a poor job on that, in my opinion. They made it so that if there's an error inside of one of the listeners, it crashes the program, and that to me is unacceptable. So it's just some of this stuff just kind of bothers me. Okay, so some of the anti-patterns. God object. So the idea of a God object is some instance of a class knows too much information. Okay. We're gonna go into like what that means later, but basically, this goes into like what properties should a component have. Okay. Next one is big ball of mud, often mostly referred to as spaghetti code. When there is no perceivable architecture and it doesn't really make sense, it's just kind of everything is calling other things, and it's just there's no clear rule set that you were adhering to. It just is, and it seems like you just kept writing and writing and writing and writing, and you don't have good organization. The yo-yo problem. This can be fun. has to do with like instances of class. I'm sorry, not instances. Well, yes, instances of classes, but specifically inheritance, which is where you extend a class off of something else. And so, if you are going back and forth between two classes, it can be really difficult to maintain. Which inheritance can be difficult like that. However, there is a time and place, and um, like this this can be a little bit of like a loaded thing. It's kind of subjective. There's no objective. This is a big ball of mud. There's no objective God object. No objective yo-yo problem. There's no way to really identify that. Um, but you just have to like go through and think about it. Okay, it's a case by case situation. Then you have singleton. Um, Basically, the singleton pattern. They don't go into defining. That's really helpful. Thank you guys. I don't actually remember what this is right off the top of my head. So they just say, we'll explore this and it's bad. It's like, great. What is it? Seriously, guys? Really? I really don't like. Code Academy is sometimes really good, but stuff like this bothers the crap out of me. Polluting the global namespace. That goes right into this. Okay. That's why I have the const main. I create a function like that. It just forces everything to be scoped, and I try to only if I'm in the global scope, I make everything constants, or I make them variable static properties of a class. So if I have like say I'm creating a budgeting application, I will have a class I don't know. That's not a great example. Um what would be a good example? Say I am making a video game, okay? And there's only one player. But I don't want to have a global variable name player because it's going to always be defined because you are going to be that player. And it's not going to be a constant. I mean, it could be a constant, but it's just going to be in the global scope and it's just going to exist, right? So if I have like this const player equals new player, right? This is kind of bad in my opinion. So if I create a class player, actually I'll make it class entity or something like that. Say I'm doing Minecraft. I would have a class entity, or maybe mob, or yeah, I'll do entity. And public static, or no, this isn't TypeScript. Static self equals new entity. And this way, if I'm in a function, const function, I can say entity dot self, and I will be referencing that. Otherwise, I would be like const player or self equals new entity. And this can be completely disorganized. Now I can have a bunch of static properties that are accessible through the entity namespace. It is just this is, in my opinion, is a good structure to organize your code. Okay. And solves this problem. And then modifying or extending the object. Oh gosh. Don't do this. Class thing extends object. This is a terrible idea. Just don't do it. Or even modifying the object prototype. Because if you do that, all the things that are objects, which is basically everything in JavaScript, will fail. There will be bugs everywhere. It won't act as if you, like, it won't behave the way you want it to. Okay? So this is something, they're saying this is a God object because it knows too much, because it has items purchased and transactions. In my opinion, those are useful to have on a customer, but they should be getters or a some sort of like get items total, and it will query from the database to get all of those and return transactions, an array of transactions, or more importantly, or better, a result of an array of transactions, because error handling. So this, I would agree that it is God object. It's not a great way to deal with it. The way around it is to create a method that will return transactions by calling some other function, pull the state and return it. Okay, using the customer information like the user ID. Okay, and that is a structural thing and kind of So anyway, creational category. Manufacture, refactor the code, yada yada yada. It doesn't really matter. When you need to control how your objects are created or instantiated, creational patterns fit. For the factory pattern, I think this is a terrible way to do it. That sucks. The factory pattern is the same thing as the class pattern. So just use the class pattern. Don't make it function like this. Unless unless it's creating like strings or some other primitives or like maybe an array. But if you're doing an object, it should be a class. I think this is a stupid way to do that. Okay, because that's literally what a class is for. Whatever. Okay. Singleton pattern. As the name implies, singleton pattern when we need to. There we go. This is the definition. Only need one instance of a class. So if you have a state or if you have a class like a great, I hate the game, but it's actually got some really good code in it. If you look at Cookie Clicker, okay, and you look at the code, I'm curious. Great. I'm gonna inspect. Actually, here we go. So if you look at this code, I'm actually gonna Control C, Control V, okay. And now you can see there's 18,000 lines of code, okay. So it has this, oh gosh, it's using var. This is probably compiled, and so that's why it's doing this. So it has a global variable called game, and it sets all of the properties of it, and it changes that state, okay? This concept is the, where is it? Where is my stuff? Not that. Not that. There we go. So this concept is a singleton concept, where you have a single object that you're mutating the state of based on whatever, okay? And that is totally acceptable. And you can do this the way they're doing it right now, where they like literally just add listeners, and if false, that's funny. I think that's just, oh, this is a test mod. Okay, that's funny. So they're mutating state based on listeners and stuff, which this can be good. But sometimes, say you want something else. Say you want to return something based on the state of the game. So would you go const turn value equals, and then if, what is going on? Why can't I do this? That's right. If game dot state equals started. Oh wait, I need to do that. Return true. And the coloring is all off because this file is massive. Do I want to do that? In my opinion, no, because if you are reading the state, if you have a function, you should pass the state in and utilize it. To me, that's a better way to do it. However, to each their own. You can read about all of that. Singleton is just fine. There's absolutely no problem with that. Then there are all these like patterns that you can deal with that they call. A lot of this stuff is pretty good information. I'm not going to go through each one. Because there's not one way to do it. And I've done most, if not all of these. And yeah, there's just not one right way. If you're designing a game, it's likely you want to use the singleton pattern. If you're designing a budgeting app, you probably don't need a singleton pattern because it's going to be a bunch of different things. So do you want to use if you send a request to the app mediates and assigns a driver to pick you up? To me, this structure probably wouldn't work because this is like a many-to-many relationship finding a relationship between two. I don't think that pattern is great. Maybe you want the observer pattern. I think this is, yeah. So maybe you want this, which is kind of what I alluded to before with the customer. Um, you have like add to this follower, and so you will mutate the state of this based on the thing that you put in. This is a fantastic structure. I really like this one. This gets into, in my opinion, it's better with interfaces, but it does work. Which TypeScript gets into. And then proxy, I don't understand this reflect.get. What is reflect? Is it anything? It is something. Contains namespace for invoking. Unlike all that crap. Selector to static. Great. Major use of reflect is to provide a scope, behavior, and proxy handler traps. So yeah, it's talking about this. I haven't used this before, so I don't really understand. Object is being proxied, custom behavior handled by the proxy object. So this looks like some sort of way to abstract properties. Yeah, this looks like a way to abstract properties of this into other things. That's interesting. Proxy target handler. Get city one. Interesting. That's actually kind of interesting. Huh. I would never use this because I would just create a getter and a setter. There's not really a reason for this. What is a receiver? I don't know. There's some good information in here. I've already stated that. But I should probably make a video on paradigms and how to utilize them, or at least link to some paradigms. So, all of that stated, there's no one right answer, but these are some big no-nos. You should never do this. Big no-nos.